Yeah, my name is Phil Newman. I run Longevity Technology, which is a bit like Timepie, but in English language. I'm going to be talking to you today about quite a lot of data. And obviously, Jim Mellon's not going to be presenting today, but this is a little bit of a homage to Jim. I read about Jim's company in 2018 in the Financial Times. I was actually on a cycling vacation in Norway, and it was the first time that I'd ever heard about anti-aging or longevity as a theme. And it was one of those things that made my brain start to work. And I decided that, having spent some time reviewing the industry, that this was going to be one of the biggest industries in the whole wide world. So if you want any copies of my slides, there is my WeChat contact. So very happy to share that with you if you'd like any of our data. So a little bit about longevity technology. So as you can see here, we have three aspects to our business. We have daily news on the longevity industry, what's going on from a science, business, and investment perspective. We also do a lot of work in investments, so we do investment analysis, plus we also have a lot of content that we focus on for consumers as well, because consumer education is a big part of our remit. So we all know that the world is waking up to longevity. We've got the likes of the serious mainstream media, we've got the likes of Brian Johnson, big brands getting involved, and of course, big pharma. So I'm going to be sharing some information with you today about the industry, what's going on, how the industry breaks down, what's happening in the space. This is some data that's not our data, but you can see that actually the growth projection for the longevity market is very, very significant. Now, what people are counting is the key question. So people are, for example, talking about holiday locations for elder people in some of the data that they talk about. So the reality is what is the information that sits behind the industry that we're all part of now? So we analyze the industry across 25 different domains. And you can see here, there's things like reproductive longevity, which is ovarian aging, companion longevity, which is pet longevity, and of course you've got all of the famous things associated with biotech in there as well. So the reality is it's quite a confusing industry to be part of. So we produce these investment reports which identify what's happening in the space, where the money's going, and I'm going to share some of that information with you today because we've just published our information for the first half of 2024. So we're going to take you through some of that now. So just wind back for the last 10 years. This is the amount of money that has gone into the longevity space. And this is over about 1,300 companies. And you can see 2021 was the real breakout year. Not too far behind that was 2022. And you can see in 2023 that things dropped off quite significantly in the sector because obviously investment appetite has changed around the world, which is frustrating for everybody. But the good news is that company formations, companies that are entering the market or companies that are getting funded to enter the market, that didn't drop off as quickly. So it shows you that the activity in the space is continuing. So this is the first quarter of this year. So this is January to March. And you can see that it was $3.3 billion in the first quarter, which is great. So that was nearly in one quarter all of last year. So things picking up. It dropped down slightly, as you can see here in Q2 to 1.3. But as far as it goes halfway through 2024, there was over $4.7 billion invested into longevity companies, which of course is very encouraging, which means that we're kind of getting on track to get back to the 2021 period. So as you can see, longevity discovery platforms, which is using basically AI to, first of all, identify and then pre-screen molecules for drug discovery, they are still attracting a significant amount of interest. And interestingly, in Q2, the discovery platforms were changed by neuropharma. So this is a very interesting trend that's happening in the space right now, where investors are more interested in specific clinical assets where they are targeting a specific disease rather than discovery platform. So things are starting to change around a bit now in the way that investors are looking at the space. But of course, this is also traditional biotech investors too. So the news that we publish on our website covers everything. So here's one of those neurological companies. You've got existing drugs here with near Barzillai, aesthetics with hair, pet longevity. So actually what's happening in the space is a lot of activity, but for a lot of people it's quite confusing. So it's a bit like spaghetti or noodles, right? So what I have decided to do in my position as running longevity technology is to really redefine a little bit for everybody what the levels of longevity are. So what we've created, and we launched this about 2 weeks ago, is the 10 levels of longevity. And what this is all about, basically, is to make it easier for people to understand, for example, what type of company they are, what investment thesis companies have, and where they get involved in the longevity space. So my intention is to go through each of these with you just now to sort of explain where the market is, and likewise where the investment opportunities are. So level 1 is lifestyle management, which is active management of sleep, exercise, alcohol, stress levels, and so on. Now, this is all about the wearables that are out there. This is the baseline for people to manage their own health and longevity. So obviously, we've got the big tech companies are involved in this. So where are the investment opportunities? Well, it's complicated, as we all know. We all wear wearables, we all put data into these systems. So companies that are making it easier to absorb that data into those platforms are very active at the moment. But likewise, using AI in a much more sophisticated way so you get hyper-personalization as individuals is also very important. And the key thing is that the gym sector is really getting involved in longevity now. Large gym groups are opening up their own longevity programs as well. So that's level 1. Level 2, just had a conversation in the foyer about consumer diagnostics. Consumer diagnostics is a very important part of our industry. It's creating that awareness of biological age. So obviously a lot of platforms out there now. The issue that the industry has got is it doesn't really have at this stage a validated standard. So everybody's working towards that now. But the point is, of course, is when you bridge from consumer products into clinical grade products, and you're in a position where there's continuity between the clinical community and the consumer community, that's where we're trying to get to now. So companies that are working on very, very large biobank data sets, validating their models, they're going to be the ones that are going to be the next generational step, kind of version 3 of what's happening in consumer diagnostics. Level 3 is supplements. So we had a great presentation yesterday about NAD+ precursors. Obviously, longevity supplements is a big area. We've seen them up on the floor 3. It's a very important part of the space. And of course, these are dietary supplements that are much easier to get into the marketplace. So of course, there's a lot of people being involved in doing on-trend molecules, whether it's NAD+ precursors like NMN or whatever it may be. But the opportunity in this space is to create intellectual property. So those AI drug discovery platforms that I mentioned earlier, they are also being involved in identifying generally regarded as safe molecules that can be applied with unique IP into the supplement space. And we're now seeing GMP grade, pharmaceutical grade supplements entering the marketplace. So this is a bit of an opportunity for the space to get tighter on intellectual property and valuation. So supplements is very exciting. We're getting involved in them ourselves. Now, clinical services is really the layer of where we as consumers start to integrate more actively into the therapeutics that can help us with our health span and our longevity. And longevity clinics are cropping up everywhere. They seem to be happening hundreds a day, it feels like. And what really is happening in terms of the space is there is a need now for continuity across the way that people are treated. If you're traveling from Shanghai to San Francisco, you want to see a longevity doctor in both locations, you want to be working and being assessed on the same standards. So there's this opportunity now in the space for clinics to get up to a level where they are interoperating with each other, which is a next generational step for any industry. So where the money is in this space at the moment is operational IT systems. That's a bit of a mess, and it's quite difficult for companies to work as a gym across that space. Longevity gyms and longevity resorts, the whole concept of longevity real estate is a really big investment opportunity. And of course, all of these clinics are looking for interesting, proven interventions and therapeutics, as well as devices that they can use with their clients. So this is a whole ecosystem that's starting to build now, and the layer of opportunity is in servicing that sector. So level 5 is aging disease management. So this is effectively what healthcare is right now. So this is when you're trying to help somebody who's actually got a disease. If you hit your age of 60, you're going to start getting 1 or 2 of those over the next 20 years. And that's the current healthcare system that we're all very much involved with. So this is the sick care paradigm. Lots of companies in this space are actually using targeting disease, whether it's cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or whatever it may be, as their therapeutic choice to then get their approvals, of course, to be able to then take their aging therapeutics further. But what's happening in this space now, of course, is very exciting, because we're now seeing preclinical companies that are working on aging drivers to support their claims for their acquisition maybe later with a pharmaceutical company. But these companies are now entering the clinical phases, which I'll be talking about a little bit later today. And big pharma is very much involved in this space. When companies get to the point where they're at a successful 2B readout, that's when either they can potentially IPO, or they can get acquired by a pharmaceutical company. So level 6 is where we're starting to really get into the longevity agenda. So this is the concept, of course, of preventing a disease before it happens. Longevity immunity is one of those trends at the moment. And of course, companies that are working on these aging drivers at a level, as a level 5 company, many of those are actually focused on actual disease prevention, which is level 6. So again, these are very much candidates for big pharma acquisition. We've seen what's happened with GLP-1s. I'll talk about that in a short while. But the next stage is when we start to get into the concepts of reversal. So disease reversal is where, of course, you can be using therapeutic interventions to help somebody with a particular disease. Now, companies that we've seen in presentations over the last day or so, looking at pluripotent stem cells to be in a position where you can target regeneration of an organ. We're now seeing partial cellular reprogramming companies entering this space. Had a conversation about this last night. So there are probably about 30 companies internationally now that are working on partial cellular reprogramming. And of course, this is in a position where you are regenerating perhaps heart tissue. But in the future, of course, these companies represent the potential of systemic aging reversal, which of course is really where the sector's really trying to get to the position where you can take the whole body and you can reverse that to a younger state. So this is the domain of investors that are highly speculative investors. Of course, there are a number of specialist longevity VCs in this space, but also ultra high net worths are getting involved. And the concept of these partial cellular reprogramming companies moving on to doing systemic aging reversal in the future, which does embrace things like senolytics and mitochondrial dysfunction. This is really where we're trying to get to as an industry, so we can help people across all of their body. But there is a calibration point which I think we need to talk about, which is the fact that I was asked only yesterday about people over-claiming what they should be or shouldn't be saying in the marketplace. And the reality is when you look at the regulatory wall, and for example, AI is an example where AI companies are growing super fast and regulators can't keep up. The reality is, of course, is this whole industry has a necessary regulatory wall that it needs to manage. And of course, how high that wall is for regulatory pathways is very important, but that's a reality of where we need to get to. So people that are talking in the next couple of years where these therapeutics are going to be available, conceptually they are going to be available. Maybe they're in mouse studies at the moment, but the reality is when you look at what Swiss Re thinks, which is a very large reinsurer, they think that actually anti-aging therapeutics are still a long way off. So the reality is that whether it's predicting whether humans can go over 125 years, is it physically possible to do that? When you've got these companies that are working with potentially systemic rejuvenation therapies that are very much in a preclinical phase. The reality is that as an investment category, there are really these earlier levels up to level 5 where there are investment opportunities now and investment return opportunities now, and then you've got that higher risk opportunity when you go from 6 onwards. So that's the way we look at the industry at the moment. And if we can't move quickly enough as an industry, this is where you then have, as you can see, level 9, which is organ replacement, and of course you've got the 3D bioprinting, prosthetic devices, working even with xenotransplantation, where you have tailored organs growing inside a donor pig. This is where obviously a lot of therapies are working at the moment, because obviously those therapies that we want to get to in the future aren't particularly there at the moment. And I'm sure some of you are aware of what's happening with the cryopreservation category. It's where, of course, you're preserving the whole body so that it can be resuscitated in the future, because those therapies and interventions aren't available in your existing life. There's also people that are working on digital longevity as well. But this is quite interesting because this has come back as a category. Because companies now are actually proving that they can resuscitate particular tissues, and you go from a tissue to a whole organ, and then you progress potentially to the whole body, which is the concept of being able to do that. And of course, there's a lot of crossover between the space industry and longevity when you think about space travel. So this is quite an interesting part of the agenda that's come back into the interest zone recently. And then, of course, there's the potential of digital longevity, which comes with the concept of brain-computer interfacing and AI. So the good news is that overall, what's happening globally is that median life expectancy is going up. So the fact is that people are absolutely living longer. I'm sure many of you are aware that, of course, people are living longer, but they're not necessarily living healthier. So the point is that will you make money if you're an investor investing into longevity? And it's very encouraging, as we have seen, that there is, we track the news on a daily basis. So we noticed that BioAge, which was absolutely a longevity biotech company, they were focusing on sarcopenia, which is muscle wastage as people get older, mobility being a key part of that. They appointed a GSK big hitter on their board as chairman. So we went, okay, that's kind of interesting, because they're probably going to be in a position where they're going to do something quite serious with their next phase of growth. Turns out what they did was they actually IPO'd, and they did a very good IPO. It was oversubscribed, and the price went up. So you can see that it's possible now, once the investors get out of their lockup period, that they're going to get a return on investment. And the interesting thing is in silico, I'm sure some of you are aware of Alex Zavaronkov in silico. They're also another company with activities in China that are in the phase where they're getting to that very interesting phase 2 trial output. So the reality is that there are lots of other companies coming through the pipe as well. So all those companies that have been diligently working in the lab, getting to the point where they can get to the clinic, whether it's for phase 1 or maybe even phase 2, this industry is now about to explode, which is why I'm very glad back in 2018 that I made the choice I did to get involved. So as you can see here, these are the longevity biotech categories. This is how many of them are preclinical, and you can see that a number of them now are moving from phase 2 to phase 3, which is very encouraging. Now, the reality is that a lot of those companies in phase 3, probably 90% of them won't get to the point where they get approval, but the point is, as you can see, the pipeline is full. And there are about 500 companies in this space now. So I am very excited about what's going to be happening over the next couple of years, and this is where investors are going to start seeing returns. And of course, there are some very interesting dynamics that are happening around the world. This is very much a scientific conference. You go to other longevity-related conferences about policy. Obviously, you're talking about what's happening at a macro level. And of course, in China, what's happening is there's a change in the demographic pyramid. It doesn't go into a base at the bottom. So like many countries, China's not producing enough babies. So there's some conceptual thinking going on with governments now about what's happening in this space. when you look at Germany, Germany's even worse. I mean, Germany's got a really big problem. And of course, when you look at a different industry, for example, the car industry, you can see how, from a macro policy perspective, governments are now starting to get involved in this space and start to think about how they can use some of these therapies. Now, GLP-1s, I'm sure many of you are aware of Wegovy, Ozempic, and all of these category of weight loss drugs. And it was back in August 2023 that we actually looked at this as a sector and went, okay, this is kind of interesting. You're working on an aging disease, which is diabetes. There was evidence that came out, of course, about the ability to be cardioprotective. And then there were retrospective studies to say that GLP-1s were also neuroprotective. So in many respects, you've now got the first longevity drugs already in the market, but they're categorized as weight loss drugs. So there's a point of realization that we've got to start thinking about when Big Pharma starts to move from the concept of sick care, which is level 5, as we talked about earlier, to the point of prevention, which is level 6. So there's a transition, as you all are aware, in what's happening in the pharmaceutical space. So Big Pharma's getting involved, and the key thing is how is this going to apply from a societal level? How are you going to get these drugs into being blockbuster drugs? How is an aging drug going to be a blockbuster drug in the same way that a weight loss drug has been? Now, the reality is it's going to happen because obviously people want to lose weight, but also people are going to want to live longer and live healthier. But every country has its own underclass. Now, this is quite compelling and interesting data from the States based on demographics. If you're from low income, you've got low self-esteem, you've got low exercise, you've got low opportunities, and therefore you're more likely to be a burden to your society, even though you're poor and want to do the best you can. The reality is that governments are starting to think very differently now about prevention and intervention. When you look at the USA, the blue lines basically show the population that are physically active and not physically active. And the reality is that most societies are in a position where they don't have a broad member of the population in the position where they have the motivation to be involved in this. And in the UK, there was a couple of weeks ago, a new Labour government, they were talking about having drug interventions for people that were unemployed. Now, it's completely voluntary. It's not something that the government are mandating, but the reality is that this is all starting to happen at a macro level. So this is very interesting from a market perspective, from a market opportunity perspective. And yeah, when they look at what it's worth, so this is not our data, this is somebody else's data, you can see the last grey square there is the GLP-1 categories. This is the prediction for what the first aging therapeutic is going to be in terms of turnover. So this is a great industry to be part of. It's going to be very exciting. I know some of you are here for the first time and some of you have been here for many times. The reality is that this is happening as an industry now, which of course is very exciting for us all. So those are my contact details. Just to say that we are fundraising for our business at the moment. We're closing our round in December, and we're also using our data to start our first investment fund in the first half of next year. So, okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, everybody. You've been a great audience, and if you want the data, those are my contact details there. So, thank you. Okay. Well, I've got 1 minute 40 seconds, so if anybody would like to ask a question, happy to do so.
Professor Newman, thank you very much for wonderful work. So I have one question is about, listening to talk, I think most content is about combining the commercial and the commercial activity and the clinical. So I'm wondering, because we know the science drives the anti-aging area really fast. So I want to know, have you think about how to combine the science and the commercial and the anti-aging person together, so include more area about anti-aging.
Yes, okay, so the reality is this is why we created the 10 levels, because people are very confused about the claims that are being made and where the science is. So the reality is that levels 1 through to 5 are what are available today. So there are clinics now that are deploying therapeutics and are helping people with the plasticity of their aging now. The reality is, of course, those are for people that have got the ability to pay for it, so it's higher net worth. But the reality is that this is also something that's now starting to happen at a national level. So from a translation perspective, the industry is already here. But the reality is what's coming down the line, of course, has to go through that regulatory pathway. So the realities are going to be that it's going to take time to come. But of course, when it does come, as we've seen, the data shows you that this is going to be a very big industry. So calibrating the timing of the industry, the translation from clinical, i.e. clinical as a longevity clinic, is happening now, but clinical studies from actually an approved drug into the future is still a way off. And I think that people are getting confused about that, and I feel that's something that we really do need to help the industry calibrate on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for the question.
Any other questions comes from the audience? Please just take your chance. And maybe I can ask you a question. So in terms of regulatory perspective, so nowadays we talk a lot about biomarkers, and we have this intervention, like different type of interventions, and also the longevity clinic, right? You just mentioned. So in the regulatory perspective, which part you think will be the most straightforward in the next 5 years, or maybe easier to overcome these regulatory burdens?
I think everybody's going to reduce the regulatory burdens. So from a clinical perspective, we're seeing now that there was an announcement only yesterday that a government is now setting standards for longevity clinics, which is great, right? So that means that people who are claiming to be a longevity clinic actually have to qualify as being a longevity clinic, and that's with the Healthy Longevity Medicine Society. So that's great, okay? I feel that when you look at the population burden and the opportunity that these drugs represent, that regulators are going to get more creative about the way that they look, whether it's through regulatory pathways or whether it's being able to get essential need categorizations around new drugs. I feel that regulators are going to say, okay, we've seen what's happened with GLP-1s. We're not going to completely throw the rule book out of the window, but we're going to make it easier for companies to get these drugs through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. And there are some countries like Australia now that are trying to reduce the regulatory burden so that they can attract not only the drug trials, but also those companies to relocate into those jurisdictions. So I feel that what's going to happen is brave governments, and I think where I'm in the UK, you know, the UK is no longer part of Europe. We have the NHS, we have the UK Biobank data. The UK is a great example of a country that, with the population challenge that it has, could actually deregulate and accelerate these therapeutics.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think that's very comprehensive reply and comment. Yeah, and we're looking forward to our next regulatory change in terms of that.
Yes, we all love regulation, right? So, okay.
Okay, see you later.
Thank you so much.
Okay, see you soon.
Okay, thanks everybody.